Most people believe gemstones become more valuable with time, but some of the most popular stones in the world may be heading in the opposite direction. Not because they've become less beautiful, but because the forces that determine value are changing. Supply is growing, trends are fading, technology is reshaping the market, and buyer attention is moving somewhere else. In this countdown, we'll explore 10 gemstones that some market observers believe could face increasing value pressure in 2026, and more importantly, the hidden reasons why. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand a surprising truth. A gemstone rarely loses value because of the stone itself. It loses value because people stop seeing it the way they once did. And that lesson begins with a gemstone that reveals what happens when something beautiful no longer feels rare. Number 10. Peridot. Most people assume that rarity is permanent. Once a gemstone earns a reputation as something special, many believe that reputation will last forever. But the gemstone market has a long history of proving otherwise. Peridot is one of the clearest examples. For centuries, this vibrant green gemstone carried an aura of exclusivity. Ancient civilizations prized it. Collectors admired its distinctive color. Jewelers promoted it as a unique alternative to emerald. On the surface, it seemed to possess everything needed to maintain long-term value. Yet the story of Peridot reveals a reality that many buyers never consider. A gemstone can remain beautiful while becoming less valuable. The reason has little to do with appearance. It has everything to do with supply. Throughout history, rarity has been one of the most powerful forces supporting gemstone prices. When access is limited, demand often grows around the perception that ownership is special. But when new sources enter the market and larger quantities become available, something subtle begins to happen. The gemstone itself does not change. Human perception does. Collectors who once viewed a stone as difficult to obtain begin seeing it more frequently. Retailers offer more inventory. Buyers encounter it more often online, in jewelry stores, and at trade shows. Slowly, the feeling of exclusivity starts to fade. That shift matters more than many people realize. Markets are driven not only by what exists, but by what people believe exists. The moment scarcity becomes less convincing, value can begin to weaken, even if the gemstone remains just as attractive as before. This is why some analysts believe Peridot could face increasing pressure in 2026. The concern is not that the gemstone will suddenly become unwanted. The concern is that growing availability may continue eroding one of its strongest advantages, the perception that it is special. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If a gemstone's beauty is not enough to protect its value, what happens when an entire trend begins to lose momentum? Because the next gemstone on this list isn't struggling with supply alone. It's facing something potentially far more dangerous. The end of a fashion era. Number 9. Rose quartz. Some gemstones become valuable because they are rare. Others become valuable because they are beautiful. But every so often, a gemstone rises for an entirely different reason. People believe it can change their lives. Few gemstones illustrate that phenomenon more clearly than rose quartz. Unlike diamonds, emeralds, or sapphires, rose quartz was never built around scarcity. It was never known as one of the world's rarest gemstones. It was never the centerpiece of royal treasure collections. For much of history, it existed quietly in the background of the gemstone world. Then something remarkable happened. A new cultural movement emerged. Across social media, wellness communities, lifestyle blogs, and self-improvement circles, rose quartz became known as something more than a gemstone. It became a symbol. People called it the stone of love, the stone of emotional healing, the stone of self-worth and positive energy. Its soft pink color seemed perfectly suited for that role. Unlike gemstones associated with power or wealth, rose quartz projected comfort, warmth, and emotional connection. Demand surged. Retailers created entire product lines around it. Crystal collections multiplied. Gift shops filled their shelves with it. For a time, it appeared almost impossible to escape, but cultural trends often contain a hidden weakness. They depend on attention, and attention is one of the most unpredictable forces in any market. The challenge facing rose quartz is not beauty. Its gentle pink glow remains instantly recognizable. The challenge is that belief-driven markets can change quickly. As consumer interests evolve, new wellness trends emerge and public fascination shifts toward different stones. The emotional momentum that once fueled demand can begin to weaken. History has shown this pattern repeatedly. Products tied heavily to a specific cultural movement often struggle once that movement loses intensity. The product itself remains unchanged. The excitement surrounding it does not. This is why some analysts believe rose quartz could face increasing value pressure in 2026. Not because people suddenly dislike it, not because it lacks visual appeal, but because the extraordinary level of attention that helped drive its popularity may no longer be growing. And when a gemstone depends heavily on a story, the greatest risk is not that the gemstone changes. It's that the story does. But changing beliefs are not the only force capable of weakening value, because the next gemstone on this list faces a very different challenge. What happens when a stone's entire market identity is built around being an affordable alternative and buyers suddenly discover even more alternatives than before? Number 8. White topaz. Some gemstones face a problem that has nothing to do with beauty, nothing to do with rarity, and nothing to do with quality. Their greatest vulnerability is the reason people bought them in the first place. White topaz is one of the clearest examples. For years, it occupied a very specific position in the jewelry market. It offered brilliance, affordability, and a clean, colorless appearance that reminded many buyers of something far more expensive. Diamonds. That comparison helped white topaz gain attention. It gave consumers a budget-friendly alternative. It gave jewelers a stone that could appeal to buyers seeking a similar visual effect without a similar price tag. For a time, that role worked remarkably well, but history has repeatedly shown that products built around being an alternative face a unique challenge. They are only as strong as the alternatives that come after them. The moment a newer option appears, the entire equation changes. This phenomenon can be found throughout countless industries. Technologies replace older technologies. Materials replace older materials. Consumer preferences shift toward products that solve the same problem more effectively. The gemstone world is no different. Over the last decade, buyers have gained access to a growing number of colorless gemstone options. Some offer greater brilliance. Others offer stronger durability. Some benefit from aggressive marketing campaigns that have dramatically increased consumer awareness. As new choices enter the market, attention becomes fragmented, and when attention fragments, demand often follows. The challenge for white topaz is not that it suddenly became unattractive. The challenge is that its original role is becoming increasingly crowded. A gemstone that once stood out as a practical alternative now finds itself competing against multiple alternatives competing for the same customer. That is a much more difficult battle. Some analysts believe this growing competition could place additional pressure on white topaz demand throughout 2026. Not because consumers dislike it, but because they now have more choices than ever before. And when buyers are presented with more choices, loyalty often becomes fragile. Yet competition is only one force capable of weakening value. The next gemstone reveals something even more powerful, because sometimes a stone doesn't struggle because a better alternative arrives. Sometimes it struggles because there is simply too much of it in the world. Number 7. Citrine. One of the strangest truths in the gemstone world has nothing to do with geology. It has everything to do with human nature. People often claim they want beauty, but history suggests they actually want rarity. And few gemstones demonstrate that reality more clearly than citrine. At first glance, citrine seems to have everything working in its favor. Its warm golden colors evoke sunlight, prosperity, and optimism. It has been associated with wealth and success for generations. Jewelry designers continue to use it. Consumers continue to recognize it. Yet despite all of those advantages, citrine faces a challenge that has quietly affected countless products throughout history. Abundance. The problem with abundance is that it changes perception. A rare object immediately attracts attention because ownership feels meaningful. A common object may possess identical beauty, but the emotional response is often weaker. This pattern appears everywhere. Luxury goods lose prestige when they become widely available. Exclusive destinations lose mystique when everyone visits them. Collectibles often become less desirable when supply floods the market. Gemstones follow the same rules. For decades, citrine benefited from its attractive appearance and accessible price. But accessibility can become a double-edged sword. The easier something becomes to acquire, the harder it becomes to maintain an aura of exclusivity. And exclusivity has always been one of the hidden engines behind perceived value. The gemstone itself remains unchanged. Its golden glow remains as captivating as ever. The issue lies elsewhere. Modern consumers are increasingly drawn toward uniqueness. They seek stones with unusual origins, remarkable stories, rare color phenomena, or limited availability. In a marketplace crowded with options, simply being beautiful is no longer enough to command attention. A gemstone must also feel special. This is where some analysts believe citrine could face additional pressure moving into 2026. Not because demand will disappear overnight, but because buyer attention may continue shifting toward stones perceived as more distinctive or harder to obtain. And attention is becoming one of the most valuable currencies in the gemstone market. When attention leaves, demand often follows. But abundance is not the only force capable of weakening value. The next gemstone reveals an even more fascinating phenomenon. Because sometimes a stone loses market strength not because there is too much of it, but because something that was once considered a luxury gradually becomes ordinary. Number 6. Amethyst. There was a time when owning amethyst meant something very different than it does today. Not simply because of its beauty, not because of its color, but because of what it represented. For centuries, amethyst occupied a place among the world's most respected gemstones. Its deep purple hues were associated with royalty, wealth, and authority. Kings wore it. Religious leaders displayed it. Noble families prized it. In many parts of the world, amethyst was not viewed as an affordable gemstone. It was viewed as a luxury. And that makes its story one of the most fascinating lessons in the entire gemstone industry. Because amethyst didn't lose status because people stopped admiring it. It lost status because the world changed around it. Throughout history, luxury has often depended on scarcity. The harder something is to obtain, the more prestige becomes attached to ownership. But whenever major new sources are discovered, that balance can shift dramatically. Suddenly, what was once reserved for a privileged few becomes available to millions. And when that happens, perception changes. This transformation has occurred repeatedly throughout history. Certain spices once worth fortunes became common kitchen ingredients. Exotic materials once reserved for aristocrats became everyday products. The same pattern has appeared in gemstones. Amethyst may be one of the most famous examples. The gemstone itself never became less beautiful. Its rich purple color remains instantly recognizable. Its geological story remains remarkable. Yet the emotional meaning attached to ownership is no longer what it once was. That distinction matters, because markets are influenced not only by physical characteristics, but also by cultural significance. A gemstone can remain visually stunning while gradually losing the prestige that once helped support its value. Some analysts believe this long-term shift could continue affecting commercial-grade amethyst in 2026. The concern isn't that demand will disappear. Amethyst remains one of the world's most beloved gemstones. The concern is that admiration alone does not guarantee appreciation, especially when buyers increasingly chase rarity, exclusivity, and uniqueness. And that leads to an even bigger question. What happens when a gemstone doesn't become common because of new discoveries, but because humanity learns how to produce enormous quantities of it? Because the next entry reveals how mass production can transform an entire category of luxury goods and permanently reshape the way buyers perceive value. Number 5. Freshwater Pearl. For centuries, pearls occupied a world of their own. Unlike gemstones pulled from deep underground, pearls emerged from living organisms. Their formation seemed mysterious. Their discovery was unpredictable. Their rarity was legendary. In ancient times, finding a natural pearl was often compared to finding buried treasure. Entire fortunes were built around them. Royal families collected them. Empires traded them. For generations, pearls represented one of the purest forms of luxury on Earth. Then humanity learned something that changed everything: how to produce them. And that single development may be one of the most important value-shifting events in gemstone history. The lesson extends far beyond pearls. Whenever a luxury product becomes easier to create, the market begins to transform. What was once defined by scarcity gradually becomes defined by availability. At first, the change seems positive. More people gain access. Demand expands. Sales increase. But over time, another effect begins to emerge. The emotional power of rarity starts to weaken. Freshwater pearls became one of the clearest examples of this phenomenon. Advances in pearl cultivation dramatically increased production. Vast quantities entered global markets. Consumers suddenly had access to pearl jewelry at price points that previous generations could hardly imagine. The result was extraordinary. Pearls became more popular. Yet in many cases, they also became less exclusive. And exclusivity has always played a major role in perceived value. The fascinating part is that buyers rarely notice this shift while it is happening. They see more products, more advertisements, more availability. What they do not immediately see is how increased supply can quietly change the way a market values ownership. This is why some analysts believe commercial-grade freshwater pearls may continue facing price pressure in 2026. Not because pearls have lost their beauty, not because people have stopped wearing them, but because mass production fundamentally altered the relationship between rarity and demand. And once that relationship changes, reversing it can be difficult. Yet the next gemstone reveals a challenge even more disruptive than mass production. Because producing more of something is one thing. Creating a convincing alternative to nature itself is something entirely different, and that may be one of the biggest forces reshaping the gemstone market today. Number 4. Commercial emerald. For generations, one word carried enormous power in the gemstone world: natural. It appeared in auction catalogs, museum descriptions, collector conversations, and luxury jewelry showcases around the globe. For decades, that single word helped separate extraordinary gemstones from ordinary ones. Today, however, something remarkable is happening. For the first time in history, many consumers are beginning to ask a question that previous generations rarely considered. How much does natural actually matter? That question sits at the center of one of the biggest shifts affecting the gemstone industry. And commercial-grade emeralds may be among the most exposed. Emeralds have always possessed a unique position in the market. Their rich green color has captivated civilizations for thousands of years. Ancient rulers treasured them. Collectors pursued them. Jewelers built entire collections around them. Yet emeralds have always come with challenges. High-quality natural specimens are rare. Many contain visible inclusions. Prices can vary dramatically. For years, those limitations reinforced their prestige. Then technology advanced. Laboratory-created emeralds became increasingly sophisticated. Manufacturing techniques improved. Visual quality improved. Consumer awareness expanded. Most importantly, accessibility improved. Suddenly, buyers who once viewed emerald ownership as financially unrealistic discovered alternatives that appeared remarkably similar at a fraction of the cost. And that changed the conversation. Not because laboratory-created stones replaced natural emeralds overnight. They didn't. The more significant change occurred inside the minds of consumers. People began comparing, questioning, evaluating, and whenever buyers begin reassessing value, markets tend to respond. This phenomenon is often described as an authenticity challenge. The issue isn't whether natural emeralds remain desirable. They do. The issue is whether average consumers are willing to pay the same premium when increasingly convincing alternatives exist. That question becomes especially important in commercial-grade segments, where buyers are often more price-sensitive and less focused on collector-level rarity. Some analysts believe this growing tension could place additional pressure on portions of the emerald market in 2026. Not because emeralds are losing their beauty, but because technology is forcing consumers to redefine what they are truly paying for. And that may be one of the most powerful forces affecting gemstone values today. Yet even authenticity is not the final challenge, because the next gemstone reveals a force that may be even more influential than rarity, production, or technology. Attention itself. And in the modern world, attention can be worth more than any gemstone. Number 3. Smoky Quartz. In the modern gemstone market, one resource may be more valuable than rarity, more valuable than beauty, and sometimes even more valuable than quality. Attention. Because no matter how extraordinary something is, it becomes difficult to maintain value when fewer people are talking about it. Few gemstones illustrate this reality more clearly than smoky quartz. For decades, smoky quartz occupied a respected place in the jewelry and mineral world. Its rich, smoky tones offered something different from brightly colored gems. It possessed a natural elegance, a quiet sophistication. Unlike gemstones that demanded attention, smoky quartz often rewarded closer observation, and for many collectors that was part of its appeal. But the market has changed. Today's consumers live inside an environment flooded with visual stimulation. Social media platforms reward bold colors, dramatic effects, and instant recognition. Algorithms favor images that stop people from scrolling. Marketing campaigns increasingly focus on gemstones that create immediate emotional reactions. In that environment, subtlety can become a disadvantage, not because people stop appreciating it, but because fewer people notice it. This creates a fascinating market phenomenon. A gemstone can retain all of its geological qualities while gradually losing cultural visibility. And visibility matters. Throughout history, value has often followed attention. When a gemstone dominates headlines, social media feeds, auction reports, and collector conversations, demand tends to grow. When it disappears from those conversations, demand can slowly weaken. The process is rarely dramatic. There is no single moment when interest vanishes. Instead, attention drifts elsewhere. New discoveries emerge. New trends capture public imagination. New gemstones become the focus of marketing campaigns. And slowly, older favorites begin fading into the background. Some analysts believe smoky quartz may continue facing this challenge in 2026. The issue is not supply. The issue is not technology. The issue is relevance. Can a gemstone maintain strong demand when consumer attention increasingly favors brighter, rarer, and more visually dramatic alternatives? That question extends far beyond smoky quartz, because in today's marketplace, visibility often shapes perceived value, and when visibility declines, value can follow. Yet the next gemstone reveals an even more surprising lesson. Because sometimes attention becomes too successful. Sometimes a gemstone becomes so popular, so widely available, and so familiar that its greatest strength quietly turns into its greatest weakness. And few stones demonstrate that paradox better than the gemstone at number 2. Number 2. Blue Topaz. Success is usually seen as a good thing, in business, in culture, and especially in the gemstone market. After all, if millions of people love something, that should increase its value. At least that's what most people assume. But history has repeatedly shown that extreme popularity can create an entirely different outcome. And few gemstones demonstrate that paradox more clearly than blue topaz. For decades, blue topaz has been one of the most recognizable gemstones in the world. Its vivid blue colors captured consumer attention. Its affordability made it accessible. Its versatility allowed it to appear in everything from luxury-inspired jewelry to everyday collections. Retailers loved it. Designers embraced it. Consumers recognized it instantly. By almost every traditional measure, blue topaz was a success story. Yet hidden inside that success is a fascinating problem. The more common something becomes, the harder it often becomes to feel exclusive. And exclusivity has always been one of the invisible forces supporting long-term value. This creates a dilemma that appears throughout history. Products that achieve mass popularity frequently lose part of the mystique that once made them desirable. Luxury brands carefully limit production for this reason. Collectors seek objects few people own. Even in art, rarity often influences perceived importance. The gemstone market follows many of the same psychological rules. Blue topaz became so widespread that ownership gradually lost some of its uniqueness. Buyers could find it almost anywhere. Jewelry stores carried it. Online marketplaces carried it. Television shopping networks carried it. Accessibility expanded, but exclusivity diminished. The gemstone itself remained attractive. Its color remained appealing. Its geological characteristics remained unchanged. What changed was the emotional experience of ownership, and that emotional shift matters more than many people realize. Some analysts believe this dynamic could continue placing pressure on portions of the blue topaz market in 2026. The concern isn't that consumers will suddenly reject it. The concern is that widespread availability may continue limiting the perception that it is something special. And once a product becomes viewed as ordinary, rebuilding exclusivity becomes extraordinarily difficult. But the gemstone at number 1 reveals an even more powerful force. Because popularity, oversupply, technology, and changing trends all have something in common. They become dangerous when they collide with hype, and no force has destroyed more market enthusiasm than the moment when excitement finally runs out. Number 1. Morganite. The gemstone market has witnessed countless discoveries, countless trends, countless success stories, but perhaps the most powerful force of all is excitement. Because excitement can transform an overlooked gemstone into a global phenomenon. And when that excitement fades, markets can change with surprising speed. No gemstone on this list illustrates that reality more clearly than Morganite. Its rise was remarkable. Unlike emeralds, rubies, or sapphires, Morganite did not spend centuries dominating the jewelry world. It wasn't the centerpiece of royal collections. It wasn't associated with ancient empires or legendary treasure hoards. For much of its history, Morganite remained a relatively quiet gemstone. Then came a perfect storm. Consumer tastes began shifting toward softer, more romantic colors. Rose gold exploded in popularity. Social media transformed engagement ring culture. Younger buyers started searching for alternatives that felt modern, distinctive, and different from traditional diamond-centered designs. Morganite arrived at exactly the right moment. Jewelry brands embraced it. Influencers promoted it. Retailers expanded entire collections around it. Demand surged, and for a period of time it seemed as though Morganite had secured a permanent place among the industry's most desirable gemstones. But history has repeatedly demonstrated a difficult truth. No trend rises forever. Eventually, every market reaches a point where excitement becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, it becomes much harder to sustain momentum. This is known as the end of the hype cycle, the phase where enthusiasm no longer accelerates demand, the phase where buyers become more selective, the phase where attention begins searching for the next story. That shift does not mean Morganite is losing its beauty. It does not mean the gemstone lacks appeal. What it means is that the forces that once pushed demand upward may no longer be growing with the same intensity. And when a market depends heavily on cultural momentum, even small changes in consumer behavior can have significant consequences. This is why some analysts view Morganite as one of the gemstones most vulnerable to value pressure in 2026. Not because the gemstone failed, but because it succeeded. Its popularity became so widespread that sustaining the same level of excitement became increasingly difficult, and that may be the most important lesson in the entire gemstone market. A gemstone rarely loses value because it becomes less beautiful. More often, it loses value because people stop seeing it as something new. And in a world constantly searching for the next trend, that may be the greatest risk of all. The biggest lesson from this list isn't that some gemstones may lose value in 2026, it's that value is shaped by far more than beauty. Trends change, technology evolves, supply grows, and what people desire today may not be what they desire tomorrow. In the end, a gemstone's value isn't determined by the stone alone. It's determined by how the world sees it. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden stories, history, and market forces behind the world's most fascinating gemstones, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next discovery.